All right, hi everyone, good morning. Can you hear me? Excellent. Thanks for coming out this early. I think not everyone made it. There was a group last night going to karaoke, which, I'm not sure everyone who went I would recognize, but I don't think many of them are here. Oh, Crystal, hi. Hi, Crystal. How was it? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I'm supposed to give a keynote. I really want this event to be, kind of down to earth, not very flashy. So I put it in quotes. So please don't expect like a super polished presentation that's like scripted and we're like, you had some advertising agency go over the slide and make them pretty. If there was, they wouldn't have done a good job. Although it's nice using this nice template, right? So this is just going to be low key. I'm going to talk about what I find exciting in AMP development land and stuff like that. By the way, my name is Malte. I lead the team at Google that is working on AMP across various dimensions. And yeah, let's get started. First, I want to talk really quick. Obviously, this is the Contributor Summit. We should talk about the AMP open source community. This is a graph. It's a really scientific graph of how this community is developing. The green one, well, it's kind of cut off, but you can see it on the side. That's the AMP open source contributor count going up. And I made this analysis. It's negatively correlated with me contributing to AMP. So apparently it's good for AMP if I write less code. Yeah. And this actually comes to, there's now almost 1,000 people who have contributed code to AMP, which I think is incredible. That's like a lot of people, right? Like, it's really difficult to like comprehend what that actually means. It's just so much. And last year here, we actually announced the new governance model. So many of you maybe never knew this or didn't, or forgotten already. But before last year, the governance model was basically that I got to make all the decisions, which was, I think problematic in some ways. It was also like de facto not how it worked, because obviously, it's not a very scalable model, and so there were like experts in each area actually making the decisions, right? But it wasn't a good model for how to run an open source community, even though that's basically how most open source projects like Python, Linux, Perl, there's so many examples that kind of use this mode for the longest time, Node.js being another one. And Node.js, I think, is also the greatest example for stopping doing this and I think switching to a more sustainable model. And we then built the model for governance of AMP based on this. So it was announced last year, and what we have now are two main bodies. There's the technical steering committee. Many of the members are here today. There's a few folks from Google, from Microsoft, Pinterest, Twitter, Pantheon. And so that group meets every 2 weeks and goes over the technical and sometimes non-technical decisions that need to be made with AMP. And usually decides, and so far always decided in kind of being on the same page, right? But there could come to the situation that they would vote, and then it would be just normal majority winning. And then the final one is that there's an advisory committee that is just meant to be a more diverse body from like different constituencies that kind of have a broad set of advice guiding the direction of the project. And I think this has been working quite well, and I'm really happy with it. Now this year, one more thing I want to emphasize is that that's basically like that's the stuff that's written down in like basically the constitution of the project. It's not where the actual work really happens. That work happens in working groups. Under this link, bit.ly/amp-working groups, you can find the list. And this is where, if you want to be a contributor, many of you already are and participate in this. But if you're looking to join one of these working groups, that's where you want to go and find out how to participate in the work. They all have a Slack channel, and many of them actually do either weekly or bi-weekly, whatever makes sense for them, meetings where you can participate in kind of the day-to-day work of that group. All of these groups, I think they all have their own dynamics. They're not all the same. So There's, for example, the UI working group who, they're working on AMP components, very concrete work, but they're also very directly related to AMP. And I think if you go to the email group, you would find more people kind of out of the ecosystem that want to contribute to the standard side of things because they care about it from the outside. So this is a different dynamic, but just something to check out. All right. So this is the keynote today, but actually, there's a relatively exciting announcement to come, but not today. We have to wait till tomorrow. That's related to governance. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is kind of respecting the opportunity of contributing to AMP. What it actually means for you to work on this project that reaches many, many, many billions of web pages. So we used to announce how many there were, but it was always kind of undercounting because we did it based on Google's index, and Google's index actually, unfortunately, doesn't cover the entire internet anymore. But it's definitely a double-digit billion count, so it's really, really big. And when you make a change that affects a lot of people, literally billions of people get affected when you contribute to the AMP open source repository. So that really is something that you have to keep in mind and respect as a powerful thing. The first point I want to highlight here is how important accessibility is as something that has to be considered with every change to AMP, and how it's also really an opportunity to make accessibility better on the web. The thing is that while the initial version of the web had actually good accessibility, like in the early 90s, when kind of in the first browser wars, JavaScript was added, everything happened overnight. Every change was never discussed, just landed as a commit into browsers, right? Nobody thought about it and what the larger applications were. And now we're stuck with it because the web, and that's one of its greatest strengths, is backward compatible to 1997, right? And that's great, but it also means that you can do lots of things where if you had thought about it, that's probably not how we would have designed them. And AMP being based on HTML but having its own set of rules can make things better. And and we need to do that. It's actually a similar situation where if you don't think about these things, if you don't respect the opportunity, or if you don't deal with it, then we are in the same situation because AMP actually also has these same backwards compatibility problems. So you have to get this thing, usually at least, right from the start. One of the greatest example, I think, is the fact that on the web, when they added the click event, right? There was never any restriction what you can add it to. And so you can add it to a div, right? And so you can make a div that has an image inside of it saying, please click me, but no alt text. And then it has a click handler. And if you, can visually read that text, you have absolutely no idea that it's a clickable element, right? And there's really no good reason for having allowed this. And so in AMP, when you use the onTap event, then AMP checks that the element has either it's a naturally clickable element, like a button, or an actual link, or that there's an ARIA rule on the element that tells the browser explicitly this is something that can be interacted with a click event, right? And so this is a really subtle change, but it really makes it just kind of brings it in front of everyone that they have to think about it. Because now there's an error if you forget it. And most developers will say, OK, I guess I will need to put ARIA role button on this div. And that's actually a really good change. But if no one told them, they might have just not known because they're not an expert. And so that's just one example. There's dozens of areas in AMP where this is important. And so if you contribute to AMP, it's always really, really key to think about accessibility and how you can advance the state of the web and how you can make it better in AMP. Basically, I think our goal, we can't be perfect, but we should be at scale. AMP needs to be significantly better accessibility than the web at the same scale is. And I think that's a goal that we actually have achieved already and that we need to achieve in the long term. All right. This might be a controversial slide. Delving into politics, maybe. No, I'm not delving. But this is the 2016 distribution of family wealth in the United States. And as you might expect, there's very few people owning most of the money. That's not actually my point. I'm not going to talk about distribution of wealth. But this same type of bias where the rich own the good stuff and the poor don't actually translates to different areas of the world. And it happens to web performance. So what we've observed in our study, and you can actually do this yourself. So there's a Chrome project called the Chrome UX report. And basically, it's a large database that has for each website how fast it is across the various of metrics, right? And if you do that analysis, what you find is that the large and well-funded websites are, at scale, they're faster than the small and like homemade websites, right? So there's a bias of web performance to those people who can afford like hiring expensive consultants, who can hire expert development teams, and so forth, right? And I think that's, it's good for those consultants, but it's really not great for users that, only the people who can afford good performance are achieving it at scale. And so I resurrected this slide, which I used 4 years ago, talking about AMP, kind of to explain what we really want here, right? So AMP was never about, making the fastest website in the world. And you sometimes see someone claiming, yeah, I made a website faster than AMP. And I've actually personally done that also myself. It's really easy, actually. You can make, a hand-tuned website that is way faster than AMP can be. Because it's more specific to that use case, then that's fine. And it's actually good that that's possible. But what we always aimed for was that the average mobile site, which used to not win this performance race, gets uplifted and comes to the front. And what we're seeing now that we have really, really hard statistical evidence that this is the case, right? And you can just kind of visualize that in your mind why that's the case. So like the number of requests that are in the cascade that are needed to show an AMP document, that's really all the same for all AMP documents, right? And so there's that, you wouldn't expect orders of magnitude of difference performance. And then obviously when the AMP cache comes on top, it kind of commoditizes excellence in delivery. So it doesn't matter whether you can afford an expensive CDN, you get the top performance, right? And so that really is just another point where you have this really equal performance across the entire stack. So yeah, just kind of summarizing this. One of the big benefits of AMP is that it doesn't have this bias that comes with being able to afford good web performance. And again, I just want to highlight how this is an area to think about, how you can make a difference by identifying a certain bias in web development and bringing a solution to AMP that's then available to everyone building AMP pages. It doesn't even, it doesn't have to be just a performance thing. Actually, accessibility is another actually good place where you would probably find the same bias that we've observed in performance. It's a bit more difficult to measure, right? But you would probably find the same bias that the sites that can afford the expert, the consultant, do a good job, and the sites that can't, they don't do a good job. And so solving this at the framework layer in a way we really, just by doing the default, achieve good results can be really, really powerful. All right, let's move on to just kind of, my top of mind things in AMP and how I think about them. First one is that, we've talked a lot about sign exchanges, or sometimes called web packaging, which is a technology, it's a web standard that allows you to sign a document and then have someone else deliver it. But because you sign it, the browser says, okay, let's say CNN.com cryptographically identified this document to come from them, and so I can act as if it was delivered by a web server that happens to have the CNN.com DNS domain name, right? So this is a really generic technology that's not specific to AMP, but what it allows in AMP's case is that you can get rid of this stupid google.com/AMP URL space, because delivery no longer is tied to that entity that physically does the loading. I'm not going to go too deep into this. There's obviously talk about this at this event, But if you happen to use Cloudflare, you really just have to click that little button. You should do it. And if you don't, there's a self-service option. It's basically just an open source project that you have to install, and then you can run this yourself. You'll also hear at this event about AMP stories. This is a slide I stole from an internal presentation, which is why it looks good. I think as a contributor, I would look at AMP stories if you really want to do like really cool stuff. So they focus a lot on stuff like 3D images, 360 images, parallax, kind of trying to make these type of effects available to the people that maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to implement those. I think it's also really interesting to kind of compare AMP stories to formats like Instagram stories or Snapchat stories. One of the things, and you might not know this, but how they work is that it seems like multiple slides, but it's really just, they're all videos, right? And so they're composed at creation time, and all you get out is a video, which, I mean, there's some benefits to it. It makes the clients that play them back really simple. They're just video players. But it's obviously like absolutely atrocious for accessibility. It's really bad for searching them because there's just a video. There's no text or anything. They're not responsive because they're literal videos that have a certain aspect ratio, and the only thing you can do is like show black bars or cut them off. And then stuff like this, these 3D effects obviously also can't be done because they're all just videos that can't be really interactive at runtime. So we're really just excited, kind of playing it around a little bit. Not sure if any of these things launch. This is not an announcement. Like people are working on this, not even working on it, on some of these, but they're kind of the thing that the stories working group are looking at as things to implement on top of the format. All right, let me have a sip of coffee. Next thing that's been around for a while, but I think is really important for people to know about is optimized AMP. So this is something that the AMP cache introduced a while ago, where basically you take AMP, but you really take it as a compiler input and optimize it to a faster representation that has exactly the same results. And the main thing this actually improves is FCP. That's the first contentful paint, because it removes that little inline CSS that hides the page and waits for JavaScript to load, blah, blah, so that just goes away, and so the browser can render everything up front. That's one of many benefits. So there was a plugin to do this in Node.js, and it was fine. But the problem that when you did this, the document was no longer a valid AMP document, which led to all kinds of awkwardness. For example, if you shared a link on Twitter because they linked to the origin AMP, even if you had an optimized version, they would actually link to the unoptimized version because you had this pairing between optimized and unoptimized. It was really bad. And so we did a lot of work to be able to validate the optimized version as well. And so that's been launched a while ago. So now you can do this, but you can actually modify the document place. You don't have to worry about validness and so forth. I want to highlight this as a good contribution opportunity. So in Next.js, which is a React framework, if you use it to build AMP pages, they just optimize it by default. You don't have to worry about it. It's nothing you have to think about. And I think this type of, the similar optimization can be done at a similar layer. So if you, for example, if you contribute to a CMS, it should be relatively straightforward to take the optimizer and put it into that CMS so that all the users can just get optimized AMP and don't have to worry about it. Where that might not be as easy as based on the programming language, I think there's actually so the current version that we have is based on Node.js, which is also why it was so easy to put this into Next.js. If you, for example, have a PHP-based CMS, you might, and you don't want to shell out to Node, this might not be ideal. I think there's a project that actually ports this optimizer to PHP, so that might be an option. This is a slide I stole from Brent Ike and added one bullet point. He's been saying always bet on JS. There's been this meme that JS couldn't do things, and then it turned out it could from rich internet apps and it couldn't be fast. And we said it couldn't be fast in AMP, and didn't allow people to run JavaScript. But obviously now there's MScript. We announced it at MConf. It for real launch a few weeks ago. So now you can actually use it. And there's a talk right after this, so I don't want to go into too much detail. That kind of talks about how it works and what it is. I think it's really exciting technology based on web workers, so JavaScript running in separate threads. All right. One of the things that's actually important about MScript when you think about AMP development is that AMP originally made these assumptions about a document. So it assumed that it would know when things change. And actually, you couldn't even change that much, so it largely assumed that probably things wouldn't change. And that allowed many optimizations and many simplifications in the framework. And obviously, giving people the power of JavaScript, they can just change things. And so components have to, expect the world to change. That kind of ties into the next topic, which is a project we're calling Bento, which aims to make the AMP components that you know for AMP documents available outside of AMP documents. So that if you say, the AMP carousel is great, has awesome accessibility, I want to use it on my, product page that happens to be non-AMP, you should be able to do it. Today, that maybe actually works, but it will break really subtly because these components don't expect things to move around, right? So they have to be made way more robust to kind of expecting the world to be mutable, right? So with MScript, there's still some restrictions of what you can do and some management of the life cycle. But obviously, if you're outside of an AMP page, you can make no assumptions about the world. It's mutable. It will change. Things might be removed from the page at any second, added to the page at any second. Everything you could possibly think might happen could happen. And so we've been thinking about this, and it's not something that AMP was originally designed for. And so we need to make major changes. So once we got going on this, things actually started to become really complicated. So in web components, you have to handle changes relatively explicitly. You have to then program that state machine, like what happens when someone adds a slide to a carousel? Right? What happens if someone removes the first slide, the current slide? Like these are all really complicated questions, and they're really difficult to model. And they're baggage also for people who don't necessarily need this. And so we've been thinking about this, and at some point came to the conclusion that there's actually a solution for it, which is that some people at Facebook a few years ago had the idea that you could just express UI in terms of some state, and then when the state changes, you just change your expression of what the layout should be based on the new state, and have the magic thing in the background do the diffing and handle the changes. And so this is my last slide. We decided that we would rewrite AMP in React. And this is actually happening. I don't have many details, but Dima and I think Justin will talk about this later. There's an asterisk. So obviously we're not going to use React because it's way too big, but there's a library called Preact that's really small and does the same thing. This is going to be 100% backward compatible. So AMP is still going to use web components because that's no way for us to change it because that's what everyone's using. But so what this is doing is it takes the attributes and takes the children of the web component, represents them as state for that component, and then uses the normal React component model to turn that into a representation. And when that changes, it just observes that change at the framework level and re-renders the component. And so the engineer working on the component has to have never has to even think about the change of the thing. They just, express how they want something to be based on the inputs. So yeah, we're really excited about this. It, might not work, but that's kind of what we're planning to do. Thank you very much.